Hello. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We are blessed to have Meridith here with us to discuss some tips on how to present publicly. So, Meridith, I would like to give you this opportunity to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to have this conversation with you today. I am delighted. Uh, my name is Meredith Grundei. I have Meredith Grundei Coaching, or GrundeiCoaching.com is where you can find me. And I'm a public speaking and presentation skills coach who really leans into my background as a performer and as an improviser to help my clients really find their own voice, find their sense of presence, and to really be able to clearly communicate their message to the public, whether that be one-on-one, on stage, here virtually. It's really important to me that people feel confident and step into their power. So I really love what I do and excited to be here. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I love that. So you own your own company. You're an entrepreneur. Was there a moment that you kind of clicked and said, I need to start my own business?
Well, I didn't really have like an aha moment. It's kind of, as an actor, you're a freelancer, you're an entrepreneur already.
Mhm.
I've had one 9-to-5 job, and that lasted 2 years. I got laid off with a lovely severance, and I never looked back. And from then on, I would contract with other companies. So people would hire me, or I would get hired to do a TV commercial, or I would be on stage, and I'd get hired by that theater. I'd be hired by other institutions. Like I worked for the Second City. I've worked for the Denver Center for the Performing Arts. I've been a guest professor at universities. So I would just kind of hop around and get hired in that way. So that was just always the way things went, I guess, as a freelancer, if you will.
Mhm.
And then I did start a business called Red Ball Communications when I was living in Colorado. It was inspired by an improv game that I like to play. And I had that business predominantly doing the same thing that I'm doing now with Grundei Coaching. And then I did a name change when I moved to New York City. And I pretty much I would have considered myself more freelance at that point. And then it wasn't until the pandemic that I made it an LLC and have been really committed to working with individuals and organizations on helping them feel more like confident speakers. So it's always just kind of been ingrained in me because of the way that it's set up as an artist. That's just what you do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you work with people, obviously I think it's one of the number one fears people have is public speaking.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the tips, or how do you present it to people that this is something they should invest in? What makes your presence important in the message you're trying to deliver?
Thank you. I feel like public speaking anymore is incredibly important because, and there's a lot of things that go into being confident with that I feel that a lot of us aren't really taught how to do properly, or we're not taught to pay attention to it. And two of those things is our voice, and then our own physical presence, our body language. People make a decision about who you are basically within the first 3 seconds that they meet you based off your body language alone. Your voice is your instrument. It's your tool. The way you breathe is important. Finding a variety of in your intonation, your pitch, the way that you deliver your message is super important. So being self-aware and building your confidence through self-awareness, through physicality, through vocal, I think is what's super important. And so my philosophy is that I give as many tools as I possibly can to my clients so that they can find what works best for them, because I do not think it's a one-size-fits-all approach. I do, however, think it is a process. And as long as you are continuing to incorporate the tools that you're given into a daily routine or habit, they will eventually, like your breathing will eventually be integrated into something that doesn't feel like a chore to have to drop your breath down into your diaphragm. Finding vocal clarity and composition, if you will, will start to come more naturally as you start to incorporate and integrate that into your day-to-day as well. The other thing I would also add that I feel that we don't really get taught is paying attention to our space and how we use it. So how are you standing with a person at a one-on-one networking event? How are you, for example, I have a client who educates people in the salon industry, and he has to teach chairside manner. Are you standing behind your client? Are you standing in front of them? Are you making eye contact with them? Same with stepping onto a stage. How are you taking in that space? How are you taking in your audience? What is your relationship to the podium, to the screen, to the wings, whatever that space might look like? So really getting people to open up their awareness, essentially. That was a long answer to your question.
No, I think it's so important because you bring up a lot of things that I never think about when I'm going to give a public presentation or I'm going to talk with others. I never think about the space. I'm usually just nervous about remembering what to say or how I come across, so I don't even consider the space. So I think that's a really great tip.
Well, and what happens too is that we get nervous oftentimes because we are so reflected on we're reflecting more on us, we're ourselves, right? We're like, oh, I might mess up, or me, 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 me. So if you can take it off of you and actually put it on your audience and put it on how you're going to help make them feel comfortable in this space, how are you going to be the host of this party and make people feel welcomed and cared for? I think that's super helpful in managing some of that when we can really take it off of ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's really great to keep in mind when you're presenting. I did have a couple of questions. Recently in the pharma world, we've had quite a few like controversial topics that come up. And do you have tips for how to deliver controversial topics? Is there a certain thing that we should keep in the back of our minds while we're speaking about something that may not go over so well with 100% of the audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. First, I think the first thing I would stick to the facts, stick to the research, keep your cool. So if you feel that maybe what someone just said is a little bit triggering, try to keep that poker face the best that you can and be as unbiased as you possibly can. And then always find a way to pivot back to your main message. So I think it's about being clear about what your message is and making sure that you're sticking to that message. Also, I feel that it's really important to be as knowledgeable on both sides of things, because that will also help you pivot back to what your main message is. So those are things that come top of mind when talking about controversial issues like that.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's really useful. And when people are presenting, do you see a difference between the way women are perceived versus men? Are women under more scrutiny, do you feel, when they're doing their public presentations?
I think so, yes. I blanketly yes. And I also feel that as women, I've noticed, okay, for example, for myself, I just noticed in this talk alone, I just said, I think, before 3 things that I offered into this space. We do it sometimes to ourselves where we unconsciously, doubt ourselves. So if we can figure out a way, instead of saying, I think, transform that to I believe, or more forward moving. It's like, I'm not questioning myself. I actually believe it, or I wonder, or I'm curious. I feel like if we can pay attention to our own language and start here first, will help us tremendously. I also think, it's funny when I saw that because you sent me some of these questions, and I got to read them just before we got on this call. Gary Vee popped into my head because he's a great public speaker and he's super authentic, and he can get away being on a stage in front of a group of people in a hoodie and a pair of jeans. I don't know very many women who can get away with that. And I want to see more of us being able to like really own it however we want to own it, however we want to show up,
Mhm.
and being really clear about what our personal brand looks like and having confidence in that. And that's the thing that Gary Vee has, is just this like amazing, endless confidence. I want to see more women really own that space in that same way too.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting you bring that up, like appearance wise, before we get on video, or we can't just be comfortable. But also, I think women's language, like you said, how you you say I think. Well, women
Mhm.
often use upspeak, or
Mhm.
we what do they call that, when you kind of draw out your words a bit,
Uh-huh.
and we use like, we have all these filler words. And there's two sides that I've heard. I was in Toastmasters for a while, and
Mhm.
so those things are like forbidden, and we actually keep track of when you're doing that in a presentation.
Mhm.
But then I read this really great, I think it was New York Times article or Atlantic, and they were talking about women's language and how it's been kind of formulated to try to go toward men's language, and we just don't talk like men do. So when we get those kind of scrutinies, it's really trying to change the way women communicate. So that article was saying, basically just relax and let women speak the way that they want without the judgment. But
Mhm.
what are your thoughts on that? I feel kind of in between, because I understand it's a way women communicate, and it's what really natural for us to use those kinds of filler words or upspeak, and all of that is just part of our kind of language culture, I guess.
Mhm.
But then I do feel that people take you less serious when you are using like a lot in your speech. What are your feelings about that?
I think it's interesting, and I think it depends who your audience is, and who, yeah, your message is delivered to. There was an NPR, I want to say it was This American Life, that I heard one of their correspondents. They had this whole conversation about exactly this, and more of the millennial Gen Z generation kind of has more of the vocal fry upspeak
Mm,
habits than I think the other generations have, less so than like the boomers or the Gen Xers, which I think is fascinating as well. And what they were saying, and I would say is true, it depends. So if you're a millennial, for example, and you do have a vocal fry and you're delivering your message to another group of millennials or Gen Zs, they're going to be
mm,
more forgiving than if you're doing your presentation for a group of baby boomers, for example.
mm,
And so I think it really depends. I I do think that fillers are tricky. The likes, the ums, the uhs, the I don't knows, or the I knows, or how whatever those are that you use. Oftentimes, it's because you yourself are not clear about what your message is and what you want to say in that moment,
mm,
or you're not, or both, you're not using your breath properly. So oftentimes in those moments where we should be taking a breath or we should be pausing, we're filling it. And we're filling it with an ah, uh, you know. So those are the things that I would actually, I always say, go back to you,
mm,
notice your own patterns, and then ask yourself the question, how do you want to present yourself in the world? How do you want to be seen? How do you want to be perceived? How do you want to own your own individual, unique, amazing, remarkable voice? And block out all the noise, because I will say this, having been in the performing entertainment industry for years,
mm.
everyone has an opinion, and everyone's opinion is different from the last person's opinion.
Yes.
And I would say that's so true in any industry. So what I say is, go back to, what do you want to do? How do
Mhm.
you want to perceive? How do you want your voice to be heard? And then focus on that, because trying to be something that you're not. But I
Yeah.
think it's a great discussion. I think it's a great conversational piece. And I think fillers and upspeak and all of those there's nuances.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's very interesting to see where this will go with the new millennials entering the workforce, and I think they are changing quite a few things. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty exciting time.
It is exciting. I'm
Yeah.
like, bring it on.
I
I
know,
think
me too.
change is great. I think change is necessary. Change is great. It puts a spark under, our little tushies.
Yeah, I love it. So if you were to leave us with one tip today, what would that be?
Oh, one tip for today. Ah, I would say, really, it's something I just said, actually, which is own your own voice and own it with confidence. And if you're not sure about how to do that, then reach out, find mentors, give me a call or shoot me an email. There's lots of places. I think there's confidence in community too. So when you can find a group like Toastmasters, or I have a group coaching class called Confidently Speaking, there's so much confidence to be had in community because we're all going through it together and you're never alone. That was more than one tip, but
No, I love it.
I
I
like
love
that. I
the
like
community.
leaving people with more than one tip. So there we go.
Yeah. Owning your own voice in your own community.
Yeah.
So at the beginning, you did tell us how to reach you on socials. Do you want to remind us again? And then I will link your social connections in the comments section for the audience.
Yeah, thank you. I'm at grundeicoaching.com, and Grundei is GRUNDEI coaching.com. You can find me there. You can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Meridith Grundei. You can also find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok, of all places, but you will not find me on Facebook. That's
Okay.
it.
Okay, great. And I really appreciate your time today. The closing question that I've been asking all of my guests are, what is your favorite book or book recommendation for the audience?
Ooh, well, I just finished reading Atomic Habits by James Clear. I
Oh,
highly recommend that book. I think it's a fantastic way to start your new year.
That's a great book. And I'll link that in the comments as well. So
Great.
thank you so much, Meredith, for your time. I really had fun talking with you today.
Thank you, Taya. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.